Hello, and welcome to another episode of Growing Up 2000s. I'm your host, Christopher Burrows, and today we're looking at the unusual 2000s phenomenon of advergaming, a term coined by nutritional scientist Deborah Thomson, referring to the idea of games serving both as entertainment and games themselves, and also having a dual function as advertisements. Now, the concept of advergaming is not new, and in fact, even games like Super Monkey Ball 2 had the idea of dull bananas everywhere in game. Now, this obviously makes sense considering that the stars of the game are monkeys, and monkeys do love their bananas. And really, I think what's interesting about it, though, is the fact that they're not just any bananas, they have to be dull bananas. Now, other product placements may not actually be A, as subtle, or B, as logical, as we'll see in the next few moments. Postopia was one of these sites, launched by Post cereal brands in 2001 and running until 2011 according to the Lost Media Wiki. As you can see in the footage here, Postopia was designed as an entire virtual world with several different locales in which players could interact with the world by playing various minigames. Of course, as you would guess from the name, one of the major goals of the site was to advertise Post cereal products, such as the ones you're seeing here, Alphabet's Golden Crisp and Oreo O's. Like many of the other sites you'll see here, Postopia wasn't exactly subtle in its advertising, and we'll see that especially when we take a look at one of the games here shortly. The minigame you're seeing here is Pebble's Big Barney Chase, and it's sort of a Candyland style board game is the best way that I can explain it, in which you try to move your character around the board and get to the finish first, and catch Barney, who has supposedly stolen Fred's bowl of cereal. But not just any cereal, of course it is Cocoa Pebbles or Fruity Pebbles. In this particular segment of the minigame, you have to take pictures of Barney in different world locales, and you get bonus points if you happen to capture a picture of Barney with either Cocoa or Fruity Pebbles. Not exactly subtle product placement. And it helps kids associate these charming Flintstones characters with Cocoa and Fruity Pebbles cereal. As you might have guessed, Post wasn't the only brand to have the idea of marketing to children through these online virtual worlds. According to Wikipedia, in 2004, General Mills created its own virtual world, fittingly titled Millsberry, to market its own cereals. As you've already seen, Millsberry, like Postopia, can't exactly count subtlety among its strongest assets. You've already seen a snowboarding game which was designed to advertise Reese's Puffs, and an advertisement for French Toast Crunch in the town's fictional newspaper. But that's the thing, Millsberry, like Postopia, is more than just an advertisement to those that grew up with it. Because Millsberry essentially is a complete online world in which a kid can basically live as an adult, learning how to manage finances, and storing it at the bank, learning how much things cost at the grocery store, going to the library, purchasing a house, and many more activities. Millsberry, however, did get a controversial reputation because, like Post, it was essentially advertising unhealthy cereals, as Deborah Thomson points out. What's so funny about Millsberry, though, is the fact that it also tried to market this idea of a healthy lifestyle and exercise and eating healthy foods, while also promoting these sugary cereals all over the site. Deborah Thomson notices that this is a little bit of a problem, and we'll discuss that a little bit more in detail later. But for now, I just want to focus on the fact that, like Postopia, Millsberry is no longer with us. Wikipedia reports that Millsberry closed in 2010, and though it's not been active for over 10 years, there's still a dedicated fan following to this basically glorified advertisement, which I find quite interesting given that Millsberry, like Postopia, was just product placement, but there's more to it than that. People relate to these characters that they created. They are excited to basically customize their homes and do things that adults would otherwise do. So it's an incredibly clever method to advertise because I don't think many kids were aware exactly what Millsberry was doing. And cereal companies weren't the only ones that were advertising their products through online flash games in the 2000s. According to Wikipedia, Wrigley and Nabisco launched the joint venture Candystand all the way back in 1997 to advertise their respective products. Here you're seeing footage of Orbit Spheres, one of my personal all-time favorites on Candystand.com. It's an otherwise normal marble rolling game, and actually a quite well-designed one at that, for a flash game at least. And the only major differences, of course, are the fact that the marble itself is based around the Orbit logo, and the collectibles, which in other games would probably be coins, are specifically made out to be packs of Orbit gum. So there are advertisements all throughout Orbit spheres through Orbit products, as you might expect. And if you thought Orbit spheres lacked subtlety, we're just getting started. This particular minigame, entitled Candystand Bowling, seems otherwise normal, except for the fact that the Creamsavers logo is plastered literally everywhere, on top of the bowling alley itself, on the bowling lane, and the balls themselves even look like Creamsavers. As with Millsberry and Postopia, I'm not really sure that I understood exactly what these minigames were doing, but I do remember being kind of interested in Creamsavers around the time that I would say 6 to 8 years old, and I can't help but wonder if games like this played a part in that. Unfortunately, like Millsberry and Postopia, Candystand is no longer with us. Wikipedia reports that the site was closed down in 2016 after being purchased by Publishers Clearinghouse. If you are by chance interested in playing any of these games, the only way to play them currently that I know of is through either looking them up on Google and finding individual archives of these games, or by finding Blue Maxima's Flashpoint project, which is dedicated to archiving these old Flash games, advertisement or not, for future generations. So, as consumers and viewers, what are we to make of all these advertainment games? I chatted with Dr. Emily Aguiló-Pérez, a children's literature professor at West Chester University, to find out some answers. And today I am delighted to welcome Dr. Emily Aguiló-Pérez into our show. She is part of the English faculty at West Chester University. How are you today, Dr. Aguiló-Pérez?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
And would you mind telling us a little bit about your research interests, how you got started at West Chester, and then also what projects are you working on in the spring?
Sure. So just a little bit, my overall research when I did my doctoral studies were on children's literature and that expanded to like children's culture and children's popular culture. So my dissertation, which is turning into a book, is actually about women's and girls' experiences with Barbie in Puerto Rico, which is where I am from. So I studied girlhood, I studied childhood, I studied Barbie as a text, and also children's literature and Latinx representation. So that really expanded into just, thinking about commercials, thinking about toys, movies, any kind of text that is a book, but also beyond that. So I started at West Chester University in 2018, and I've taught a number of sections of children's literature, Lit 219, also Lit 220, which is like the middle grade. I've also taught first year writing. Last semester, I taught a seminar on Barbie, studying girlhood through Barbie. And next semester, I am teaching writing 204, which is writing popular culture. And my specific topic is going to be Disney, the movies, toys, parks, etc. And that will be section 1, taught on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
And I honestly think if I weren't an English major, that because I'm not allowed to do gen ed writing courses at this point in my degree plan, I would definitely be interested in that Disney course because Disney is basically a huge part of my life.
Yeah.
But definitely, it sounds like you've got so many exciting projects coming in the pipeline. I'm excited to see how that goes for you and how people engage with the different classes that you have coming up. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about advertainment marketing, and especially like its idea of these advergames, this term that Deborah Thomson coined in an article about Millsberry, a virtual world created by General Mills around 2004, and it ran until about 2010. In your research, how do you think that this idea of marketing toward children, how has it changed over the years? And do you find it interesting how websites in particular became popular as advertising tools in the 2000s?
Yeah. So just to take it back a little bit, in the 80s, especially a lot of these Saturday morning cartoons were so they were created, something like GI Joe, something like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, even She-Ra, He-Man, were created as almost like an extension of or an extended advertisement for toys. So for with GI Joe, for example, the toy was created, and so there was a vested interest in kids with the action figures. But the makers were also thinking, well, how can we make children want to buy more of these, or how can we, expand the experience rather than just, having 4 or 5 figures, to have more than that, and to have a storyline when we can incorporate more villains or more heroes. And so the Saturday morning cartoon became a way to expand that narrative, or to expand the toy experience. And so these were like 30-minute long or 20-minute long commercials every Saturday morning for kids to see the characters that they had, but also to see new ones, right? Because every time that you introduce a new character, or a character changes clothes, and with cartoons it wasn't so much, they wore the same clothes most of the time, but even if you think of movies and sequels, some kind of uniform changes. So there is an opportunity for a new toy to be created. So we definitely see this happening earlier on, but with social media, or even like with the internet, then we see that expanding into, something like a game platform. And so it's really interesting the way that, these games online were also, capturing this idea of, an engagement that goes beyond the toy or the cereal. When you think about Millsberry, um, that involves the viewer, or the participant, really becoming part of that world, in an extended way.
And I think it's so interesting that you talk about the 80s, especially the marketing that was done in the 80s. Even thinking things like My Little Pony and Strawberry Shortcake, and how all that kind of tied together. And that's why like Disney had even made some cartoons that were kind of like an antithesis to that. Things like DuckTales and Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, which weren't designed really exclusively to sell toys, but designed to entertain audiences just for the characters themselves and just for the plots themselves. And then I also am thinking of, you shared something about Daniel Haid a while back, and talking about his research with Barbie, and how his daughter had encountered this book where, oh, and Barbie buys this particular outfit, and it's like a definite push for little girls to buy that particular outfit for their doll. And it's just interesting to see how children's marketing has always been there, but how it's definitely changed over the years. Continuing with Millsberry, do you think that marketing unhealthful products like overly sugary cereals, or candy, as in the case of Nabisco's Candystand, through games or television ads is harmful? Do you think that companies should avoid doing that, or are they just reading the market and selling their products? Who has the responsibility here? I know that there's been debate of, should parents allow their kids to play these games? Should they be there in the first place? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, on a personal level, I think, it's definitely. I mean, when you're marketing to children, and especially you're selling your product, as a lot of, cereals especially try to market themselves as, like the healthy choice, or, but it's a lot of sugar. Basically, it's like sugar in like a little nice, colorful package. So there's definitely that, like, kind of ethical component of, should you be selling these products to children when it's so unhealthy? And personally, I think there is a moral responsibility not to do that. And at the same time, because that's their product, they're going to try to sell it in any way they can, right? So they're gonna have these commercials, like the Tricks bunny that was so, engaging, and it was like, tricks are for kids, and so it's like, it's particularly, targeting the child consumer, that it's going to ask the parent, like, that's the one I want because it's the bunny, and it's colorful, and it's fruit, right? Like, Trix is fruit, and Fruit Loops are fruit. So it's, so they are going to try to sell their product in any way they can. So it's an interesting way to do it, through these games, because, and you sent me some links to some of the games, and I was, watching, the Nabisco one with, which is a golf course, and each hole of the course is a different candy. Although it seemed like they were particularly, advertising, lifesavers, because a lot of the courses were lifesavers. But then suddenly, You had Oreo, and you had Rick's, and I was sitting there like, oh, now I want an Oreo. So so it's definitely, I mean, there's definitely like that sense on a personal level that I feel like, yeah, they do have the moral responsibility to not advertise their product as like a something that would be good for children, and then but because they are the creators of the product, they have to sell it in a way, that is attractive to the child and even the parent. And so ultimately it lies on the parent or guardian or adult that is deciding what to use or not. And I wanted to say just quickly, I mean, I don't know if this will be a question later, but just even like how thinking about like these products of, games and cereals, just I was looking into Barbie and how Barbie doesn't have its own cereal, but for a few years, especially when some of the Barbie movies came out, Kellogg's had like special editions of some cereals with Barbie there. So you see this synergy of different products kind of converging and helping each other, or like collaborating, like licensing each other um, to promote two products at the same time. So now you're not just promoting the cereal and all the sugary, goodness, but also the Barbie or Star Wars or whoever else is being featured there, which is it's a I mean, it's a smart strategy from a marketing standpoint, but it's also, using the child as a consumer, literally of food, if you're thinking about the cereal, but also of the, the toys and games and everything else.
I think that's so interesting because you talk about the cereal being mentioned as the healthy choice, even though they have so much sugar, like you talked about Trix and Fruit Loops in particular. And what's interesting about Millsberry is like they presented all these cereals have whole grain, they have all this whole grain in it, and they've also not only that, but they're also promoting exercise alongside it. So they said, well, we
Mm-hmm.
are promoting a healthy lifestyle, but Deborah Thomson is saying they're not following through on it completely. And that's actually Deborah Thompson's what got me thinking about a lot of these different topics about like, is this an ethical consideration, as you were saying? Now, what's interesting about some of these games is that even though they were so steeped in product placement, I mean, you just see branding everywhere, people seem to have a lot of nostalgia for these particular games. And a recent project headed by a user called Blue Maxima, a gentleman from Australia who goes by that screen name, they've dedicated time to archiving some of these old Flash games, those such as the ones on Candystand and Postopia in particular. Do you think that this archival suggests that there's more to the games than just advertising, such as nostalgia or actual quality of the games themselves?
Absolutely. And even I think there are a few things here. Nostalgia sells, right? That's why we see a lot of remakes of movies. And even if the remake is not, even if the original was not of great quality, objectively, our nostalgia lenses make us remember it fondly, right? So maybe like there's a movie, and I can't think of an example right now. I don't want to insult any movie, but just like there might be something that, you objectively look at it and you say, that wasn't the greatest, but it was such a big part of my childhood that I want to keep it as it is. And so we also become protective when it comes to like remakes of things. And so I think the same way with the games. I was looking at some of the videos, and like the golf one, it's very simple. But I think even when I remember playing games on the computer, like Pinball, it wasn't anything extraordinary, but it was a way that I could pass the time. And so if that had been part of my childhood, or these specific ones, I know I would remember them very fondly, and so I would want them to remain. So having these archives, it's a way to kind of conserve a part of, a generation's childhood. And I think it goes beyond the advertisement. I think, the way that they also, the producers create these games, it's smart because, yes, it's an advertisement the whole time because you're seeing the different products, but there's the engagement, right? Like you're getting some kind of reward for it. You're not just looking at it, but you're engaging with it by playing, by winning. by creating a community. If some of these were on online platforms where you could chat with people, or even if you couldn't, now as an adult, you have a community of people who want these games saved. And so there's the quality, maybe, they were very simple, and yes, they're trying to advertise, but there's definitely that emotional attachment to them that we usually have about things that were part of our childhood, that we enjoyed or that we associate with a time of happiness or even leisure as adults, especially. I remember that time when I wasn't worrying about all the homework and all the work and all the, so yeah, so I think there's definitely, it goes beyond just being an advertisement.
I think it's funny about that idea of leisure, because when I installed the Flashpoint games on my computer, I said, I'm going to have to separate this out, because otherwise I'm never going to get anything done again, because I'm going to be sitting here playing these games all day, because it's just all these memories coming back. And it's interesting to me now as a gamer, analyzing how they design the games, not just from an advertising perspective, but also from a gaming perspective, and seeing how these games were developed, and the good design choices they made. And sometimes you're thinking, oh, these games don't control well at all, or something like that. So I think it's just interesting to revisit them and see how well they've held up or not. Because you also mentioned that about nostalgia. There are some shows I've watched on Disney Channel that I grew up with, and I thought, oh, they were really good. And then I go back and look at them again, and I think, well, maybe not so much. But when I watched them at the time, I really liked them.
Mm-hmm.
In closing today, I wanted to ask you, because I know you said this was new to you to see Millsberry, Postopia, and Candystand. How do you think, if at all, like, will they change your research going forward? What do you think they might add to research, or like how might they become a part of your future classes, if at all?
Oh, I definitely want to think about these. I in my children's literature classes, I usually include a section on pop culture that sometimes I wish I could do it longer, but the focus of the class is on the books. But I definitely want to do a more like pop culture, children's pop culture course where we can talk about games, movies, TV shows. And this is definitely something that I would want to include in that, because to me this was really interesting and new that these, food brands would create these games, and you'd think that there's nothing in common, because it's not even like a bake a cookie game or something like that. It's golf with cookies, or explore it with the octopus. So it's definitely something that I want to um, explore more, even in classes. In my research, I think by doing some research for this podcast specifically, I stumbled upon Barbie, like more Barbie games, more Barbie in other types of materials that I had not looked at before. So I definitely want to explore that further when I continue my research with Barbie. So yeah, definitely something that I want to look into more.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And as Dr. Aguiló-Pérez mentioned in the beginning of the program, she is offering several courses this upcoming semester, including a multicultural writing course with a Disney focus, and several sections of Introduction to Children's Literature if you're interested in working more with her, which I highly recommend, by the way. I'm currently taking Literature 219. It's been a really fun experience so far. So I highly recommend taking the course if that's something that sounds like it would be up your alley. Thank you again, Dr. Aguiló-Pérez, for joining me today, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. This was fun.
As you can see, the legacy of Millsberry, Candystand, Postopia, and similar sites is a lot more complicated than it might seem at first. Even though there are product placements everywhere throughout these sites, the nostalgia that 2000s kids like me, and I'm sure many others, have for them means that even though we understand that maybe these sites don't hold up as well now, or maybe we can look back and think, wow, that was a really obvious advertisement, we'll still remember them as special for the rest of our lives. Thank you again for tuning in to Grown Up 2000s. Enjoy the rest of your day.